When an empath finally stops forgiving, something extraordinary happens. Every mask in their world begins to crumble. Not just the masks worn by others, but the disguises they themselves have been hiding behind. Those who once appeared affectionate suddenly reveal their manipulations. Relationships that look tender begin to expose layers of exploitation. And most astonishing of all, the empath realizes that the heaviest mask they ever carried was their own. The mask of unending forgiveness. A mask that didn't heal them, but was quietly destroying their soul. Imagine this scene. You've forgiven them again. The one who violated your trust, who confused your compassion for weakness, who treated your sensitivity as if it were an endless reservoir to draw from. You force a smile, you whisper, "It's fine." And you carry their guilt on your back so that they can sleep peacefully while you lie awake questioning whether you matter at all. But this time, something shifts. The familiar relief of avoiding conflict never arrives. Instead, another emotion rises quietly: rage. Not the reckless kind that explodes outward, but a calm, holy rage, the sacred anger of a soul that has reached its breaking point. Carl Jung described this moment as a collision with the shadow, when everything you've buried deep inside bursts into awareness. For the empath, this encounter is life-changing, because the truth Jung uncovered, and which few dared to say, is this: the empath's endless forgiveness isn't compassion at all. It's what can be called survival forgiveness, a trauma pattern masquerading as virtue. Jung saw this again and again in his patients. He wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The empath doesn't forgive from strength, they forgive from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of confrontation, fear of being judged as unkind. From childhood, they learn their worth depended on their ability to absorb suffering silently. Jung named this the sacrifice of one's authentic self for the approval of society. But when that forgiveness ends, something revolutionary takes place. The entire web of relationships built upon their self-erasure begins to collapse. And in the ruins, the masks fall, first from others, then from themselves. Jung's most radical teaching centered on what he called the shadow. Everything we reject about ourselves and disown, only to project onto others. For empaths, their shadow contains unexpected treasures: healthy selfishness, justified anger, and sacred boundaries. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, this darkness isn't evil, it is their silenced instinct for self-preservation. The inner voice that knows exploitation when it sees it, but which has long been suffocated under the pressure to be endlessly good. When an empath stops forgiving automatically, they're not hardening into cruelty. They're integrating their shadow. They're reclaiming the pieces of themselves they abandoned in the name of keeping fragile relationships alive. Jung observed particular signs when sensitive souls reclaimed their psychological boundaries. I call them the 8 signs of sacred rebellion. If you notice these emerging within yourself, you are experiencing what Jung described as the birth of the authentic self. Sign 1. The energy stops leaking. The first shift is what I call the energy reversal. Instead of reflexively absorbing everyone's emotional waste, you pause and ask, "Is this mine to carry?" Jung noted that individuation begins with drawing a boundary between self and other. You start to notice the exhaustion that clings to you after certain interactions. You distinguish between sincere remorse and manipulative guilt tripping. And most importantly, you no longer feel obliged to regulate other people's emotional storms. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The awakening empath finally looks inward and sees the emptiness their endless giving has left behind. Others sense this transformation before you even voice it. Those who thrived on draining you, the energy vampires, suddenly avoid you. They can no longer feed on what you no longer offer. Sign 2. The performance ends. Jung called this the death of the persona, the collapse of the social mask we wear to be liked. For empaths, the mask is one of boundless patience, eternal forgiveness. But when they stop handing out free passes, the mask shatters. You stop pretending things are fine when they're not. You stop defending the indefensible. You stop pouring emotional energy into people who never once poured it back into you. This is the end of unpaid emotional labor. Jung admitted that dropping the persona can feel terrifying. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But authenticity comes with a price, the disappointment of those who preferred your performance." Sign 3. The manipulation becomes visible. Here, Jung's insights into projection are crucial. When empaths no longer forgive on autopilot, they step out of what I call the empathy exploitation cycle. Suddenly, tactics that once slipped past you become glaringly obvious. Love bombing, false adoration meant to harvest forgiveness, guilt trips disguised as vulnerability, subtle twists that turned your kindness into their weapon. Jung wrote, "Everything unconscious is projected." The awakening empath stops projecting their integrity onto others. They see not illusions, but reality. Sign 4. The guilt loses its grip. Jung observed that guilt is often just inherited shame, implanted by those who profit from our compliance. When empaths stop reflexive forgiveness, they enter what I call guilt immunity. You begin to recognize guilt as a lever of control. You stop apologizing for having standards. You no longer shrink when someone tries to shame you back into servitude. Jung called this embracing healthy selfishness. It is not cruelty. It is the survival instinct rising to protect your wholeness. Sign 5. The relationships reorder themselves. Jung believed that real interchange always transforms outer connections. When empaths stop forgiving without limits, the great sorting begins. Exploitative bonds dissolve while authentic ones grow deeper. Some people vanish the moment you stop being their dumping ground. Others attempt to guilt you into old roles. But a few respect your transformation and meet you with genuine reciprocity. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Yet such transformation only occurs when both arrive honestly." Sign 6. The anger becomes sacred. Jung understood that anger, far from being destructive, often contains hidden wisdom. When empaths stop forgiving, they uncover sacred rage, not chaos but clarity. You revisit old violations with fresh fury. You feel the weight of boundaries you never set. This anger is not poison, it is information, guiding you to where you betrayed yourself. Jung taught there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain of facing how you've been treated becomes the fire that forges new strength. Sign 7. The patterns become clear. Jung's study of personality types showed that many empaths possess heightened intuition. When they stop automatic forgiveness, their pattern recognition ignites. You begin to spot familiar cycles repeating across different people. Betrayal, false remorse, charm, repeat. You see emotional predators before they fully reveal themselves. This isn't paranoia, it's discernment. Jung called it differentiated consciousness, the ability to perceive clearly without drowning in emotional fog. Sign 8. The true self emerges. The final sign is what Jung called the encounter with the self. Not the shallow ego, not the social mask, but the whole integrated being. As automatic forgiveness fades, the authentic self begins to rise. You discover desires you had buried under constant accommodation. You find your voice after years of silence. You recognize your needs as sacred and valid. If you've experienced these transformations, declare it. My breaking point became my breakthrough. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned, this rebirth isn't glamorous. He called it the dark night of the soul, a stage where old identities crumble before new ones form. For empaths, it feels like a social death. Friends vanish, families accuse you of changing, guilt haunts you as you set long overdue boundaries. Jung cautioned, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath must walk through their private underworld, rage, grief, shame, before rising whole. When empaths stop automatic forgiveness, something extraordinary happens around them, the great unmasking. People can no longer hide behind their patience. Narcissists lose the shield of your empathy. Manipulators lose their leverage. Emotional parasites cannot feast on endless pardon. Your clarity forces their truth to surface. Jung understood, sometimes people aren't upset by their reflection in you. They're upset that you no longer carry their shadow for them. And then comes the empath's startling realization. Endless forgiveness itself was a kind of manipulation, a strategy to keep relationships alive even at the expense of the self. Jung called this recognizing one's own shadow. You see that your forgiveness often came not from love, but from fear. Fear of being left, of being judged, of being seen as bad. This truth isn't shameful, it's liberating. For the first time, you can give from freedom, not compulsion. Forgive with consciousness, not with fear. Jung distinguished between unconscious processes and conscious ones. The empath learns conscious forgiveness, forgiveness that arises after truth is spoken, after boundaries are honored, after justice has taken its course. This forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, it integrates them. Jung said, "Forgiveness is not the suppression of a justifiable reaction. True forgiveness respects the wound even while releasing bitterness." And when empaths stop bleeding energy through automatic forgiveness, that energy transforms. It fuels creativity, healing, purpose. You start making instead of merely managing others' chaos. You revive dreams once abandoned. You nurture relationships that energize you instead of drain you. Jung called this individuation,